Hello ladies and gents, Ghost here, and today I have a brand new series called Ghost Stories, which you may think is where I'm going to tell you a ghost story, but I'm so punny, it's actually me telling you a random story. So what I want to do really with this series is have a little chit chat to you guys about a random topic. So it's not necessarily going to be something gaming related, it may just be something that interests me, something that we all have a common interest in perhaps, because I love doing commentaries for you guys, and I figured, well, why not just talk about something that interests me but isn't necessarily to do with gaming. So you guys can decide whether to watch this or not, and if it interests you or not. However, today we're going to be discussing the English language, and in specifics, where some of these old English sayings that you have heard of many times, hundreds of times, but perhaps never really considered how they came into being. So as many of you will know, I actually live in Iceland now. I lived in England and grew up there until I was 18, and I've lived in Iceland the past 8 years. So as you would imagine, I've become quite fluent in the Icelandic language. Now, that's something I can pretty much safely say not a lot of English people have had the benefit of doing. Most English people, as you will know, will only know the English language, and I've come to realise that knowing a second, especially Nordic language, has made me understand my own language, English, a hell of a lot better, and where some of those things actually come from. And this actually brings to mind good old Story Machine. Some of you will be familiar with him. I think he actually lives in Finland, so it's quite funny. I think we ended up in a similar predicament. We, both met Icelandic and Finnish girls respectively and buggered off to their countries to go and be with them. So I'm sure he knows Finnish rather well, and it will be interesting to know actually if he has any experiences like I do, although I know Finnish isn't really that similar to the English language. I think its closest cousin is actually Estonian. So just to give you guys an example of just what I'm waffling on about here, the word husband, okay, the English word husband, no one really gives any thought to that word. It's just a word, you use it, you know what it means, but where the hell does that come from? Husband, it's not like it's made up from smaller words, it just doesn't make any sense. So this is an Icelandic word that you can see on the screen here, and it's pronounced husbóndi, and Icelandic words are rather interesting because their more longer and complicated words are essentially a number of smaller words strewn together and shortened. So the word hús actually means house, and the word bóndi means farmer. So this word can literally be translated as the farmer of the house. So I'm sure you guys can see the similarity between this word and the word husband. And for me, I love history, I love language. I was like, wow, that totally explains. That's where the word husband comes from. That completely makes sense. The farmer of the house, like the man of the house, the husband. I can totally see where those connections make sense there. Now, the funny thing is that the actual word husbóndi, nobody uses that in Icelandic language for husband anymore. It's a very old word that nobody uses. But funnily enough, the new version of that, husband, is actually used in the English language. So I thought that was quite interesting. Anywho, to get into the actual topic of the video, old English sayings. Let's find out where some of those come from, shall we? Now, I will try and keep these to sayings that I'm pretty sure you guys will understand. Of course, I know many of you are from countries where English isn't the first language, and even for those of you from, Canada or parts of Canada or from the US, you may not understand some of these sayings as well. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the differences between sort of English and American English. Some of the sayings, I would say probably 50% of the sayings cross over between these countries, and about 50% of them don't at all. The English have a lot of sayings that other people don't, so I'll try and keep it to the more popular ones here. Alright, so the first one here is, it's raining cats and dogs. Everybody's heard this. I'm almost sure most of you will have heard this at some point in your lives, and if you've grown up in an English-speaking country, you will have heard this hundreds of times, okay? It's raining cats and dogs. So where does that come from? That makes absolutely no sense, right? I mean, everybody goes through their life hearing this, using this, and saying this, of course, and never really thinks, like, that doesn't make any sense. That's like the stupidest sentence ever. What does rain have to do with cats and dogs? Well, back in the 15th century, roofs in northern England used to be made of thatch. So that is essentially a lot of hay strewn together, and these days you will find some thatch houses down in the south of England that are supported by wooden struts and beams. Back then they didn't have any wood, so it was just a complete thatched roof. Now, the animals, the cats and dogs, and even some rodents and insects, they used to actually go up in the thatch to keep warm. So they used to sort of dwell up there in the cold winter months. Now, if it would start to rain quite heavily, the thatch would become extremely slippery, and sometimes these animals would actually fall down off of the thatch and through the roof. Hence the saying, it's raining cats and dogs. That's been passed down for hundreds of years. That absolutely astounds me. That's just so funny to find out where that comes from for me. Alright, so the next one is bringing home the bacon. So this is a saying which essentially means that you're bringing in a lot of money, you're doing well financially, you're raking in the money, however you want to say it. I'm sure many of you will have heard this. I'm pretty sure that this is a saying that's used widely in America as well. So back in the day, pork was not a common commodity, and if you were lucky enough to actually obtain some pork, you were pretty much considered to have a fair amount of money for that and be considerably wealthier than the majority of people. Sometimes people would get pork and they would have it for a special occasion, you know, I don't know, maybe birthdays or Christmas or whatever it may be, and whenever they had guests around for said special occasion, they would actually hang up this slab of bacon to show it off, and that was a sign of comparable wealth when a man could bring home the bacon. And coincidentally, this is also where the saying chewing the fat comes from. Alright, so one more here quickly because I don't want this video to go on forever. So back in the 1500s, once again, England was actually a pretty small place, and they started running out of places to actually bury people in. So as gruesome as it may seem, what they actually used to do is once a body had completely decomposed, they would dig up the coffin, take out the bones, and presumably go and bury those somewhere else in a huge bone graveyard or something, and then they would reuse the coffin and reuse that graveyard. And upon digging up people and exhuming them, they would find that there was sometimes scratch marks on the inside of the coffin. So some of the people that they buried and presumed dead were actually still alive, which is so horrible, man. Can you imagine that, being buried alive? Anyway, what they did to prevent this in future is they would actually tie a string around the corpse's hand, or the person who they believed to be dead at least, before they buried them. They would then lead the string out of the coffin and up through the soil and attach it to a small bell. And the groundskeeper, or, you know, the gravedigger, would actually have to stay there the night, which is where one of the sayings, the graveyard shift, for people who work night shifts, that's where that comes from, you know, because the gravedigger used to have to be in the graveyard at night and listen out to see if anybody would ring the bell, if they would wake up in the coffin. And that is where the saying, saved by the bell, comes from. Coincidentally, it's also where the saying, dead ringers, comes from as well. So I hope you enjoyed this first little episode of Ghost Stories, guys. These are probably not going to be too frequent on the channel because I do obviously want to keep things predominantly gaming related. But sometimes I do enjoy talking about other things than gaming, you know, just things that I'm interested in. And I thought, well, what better than the English language? It's the tool that allows us all to communicate, especially in this day and age of the internet and people making videos. If it wasn't for the English language, you guys couldn't watch my videos and I couldn't respond to your comments and all that stuff. So I figured we all must be at least a little bit interested in that, right? Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down below in the comments whether you enjoyed this or not. As I say, these aren't going to be too frequent. Think of them a little bit like a Q&A, where I may divulge a little bit more information about my personal life. So, whereas in the Q&A, you guys are asking me questions and I'm answering them, in this episode, I may actually choose to just tell you about a part of my life. You know, maybe I'll talk about my work as a chef, because that's like a big topic. A lot of people have misconceptions about being a chef, so I perhaps thought I might do an episode on that one time. So let me know if that's something you would like to see. And once again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.